2020 has not been the best year for most of us, and particularly the game industry. It seems like this year has been filled with cancellations, delay, games they came up short, be it that Marvel Avengers game or just the general outcry about Madden 21, a game that I purchased and I was satisfied with for the $27 I paid for it, but at full price, I probably wouldn't have thought it was that great here a few weeks later. So just all sorts of shortcomings, and now the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are announced. You want to be excited for these new consoles, and something like the PlayStation 5 sells out on pre-orders like right away. So if you wanted one of those, it's kind of like forget about it. That's another thing that's lost this year. So out of all of the things that have happened, all the shortcomings we've seen, I feel like there was one beacon of hope, one thing that I noticed personally really made a difference this year, and that was the 3DS, a nearly decade-old handheld system I felt like had this resurgence this year because of all of those factors. Last fall, I made a video talking about why I thought 2020 was going to be the year to own one of these 3DS consoles, be it the new 2DS XL, the original 3DS. It didn't really matter, any of them in between, because I was seeing the price of those systems go down while the homebrew community was staying steady, and I thought that this was a great all-in-one kind of portable emulation device. I looked into these sort of knockoff multi-use systems before where they were just kind of little emulation machines that maybe played anything up to a Game Boy Advance. So, it could play Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo, original Nintendo, Sega Genesis, things like that. So I looked into those before, and they were around the $80 price range. You could find some as cheap as $40, but maybe they didn't play GBA, or they were just a really cheap build quality. So I ultimately decided that I think the 3DS is the way to go. So I had a modded 3DS already, and I just stuck with that. And I just loaded up ROMs on it, and I was able to play all these classic games the same way I would on one of those cheap systems. But it was just on a much more durable system that also had the ability to play the newer 3DS titles that, were a little bit more in-depth games, being 3D in nature, than those older 2D titles. And then it seemed like once things were kind of starting to get to be a mess around in March, as far as the global pandemic went, that's when I started to get a lot of views on that video. I think now it has like over 250,000 views, which for my channel is a substantial amount and something I hadn't done in years. And I don't think the reason was because it was a great video. I think it was a reason that the topic resonated with a lot of people as they were just simply trying to find something to do to get them through the year. And of course, there are newer systems out. You can argue that there's no point of playing a portable handheld console if you're just going to be stuck at home anyways. It doesn't really make sense. But the fact of the matter was that it became very scarce and quite difficult to even acquire those systems, particularly the Nintendo Switch. So if you were trying to play a Nintendo game, maybe you wanted to play Mario Kart, you wanted to play Animal Crossing back in April, or even really now, it was like, forget about it. You're not going to find a new Nintendo Switch anywhere. The ones you were seeing for sale, like on Facebook Marketplace for like $500-$600, it was used and looked like somebody's dog drooled all over it. So just not a good opportunity to be able to purchase a piece of Nintendo hardware or play Nintendo games at the time, or so it seemed. But then you take a look at the new 2DS XL, a system that around this time got price cut up brand new in the box, never opened one, was going for $100 at Walmart and included Mario Kart 7. And of course, I talked in the video about how easy it was to get the system modded. The newest firmware could be modded, so it wasn't like you were going to get a system that couldn't be modded. And then of course, you could play all these older titles on it. So it just really seemed like a no-brainer for $100 when at the same time a Switch is going for $500. The value was so immense, and I think that that's the reason why a lot of people got engrossed in the 3DS library this year, because even if they couldn't find the games on the shelf, the eShop was still open. Even if they couldn't go to a store, they could pick them up there. There were other means to acquire the games, particularly for people who lived in other countries where maybe the 3DS games weren't as prevalent in physical copies, or they no longer had access to the eShop because that got pulled in some countries this year. And to top it all off, I think the 3DS homebrew community was still very active, and there were a lot of people following that scene. A lot of people that got into the 3DS scene this year just because maybe they got their first console here in 2020, 9 years after the first 3DS came out. And it's really impressive some of the things that have been achieved, particularly, I think, in the way of the Super Mario 64 port. Here, talking about a game that recently came out as part of the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection on the Nintendo Switch. Super Mario 64 has no widescreen support and, quite honestly, looks very underwhelming, to put it in short. And here you have a port that comes out homebrewed on the Nintendo Switch, as well as homebrewed and running very smooth on the new 2DS XL that's in widescreen, has an HD Mario model, and it's really the game that you wanted to see in the 3D All-Stars collection, but you didn't get, and here instead you have it on an older platform, given away as, being homebrew. I'd love to leave a link for it in the description, however, I think that might get me in some trouble. But trust me, it's out there, it runs fantastically, and there are other Nintendo 64 games that do run via emulation on the system. Many of them don't run very smooth. I think Star Fox 64 is an example of one that is very playable. It's kind of just trial and error to see what other ones work. I've watched a video of someone playing Paper Mario on it. It didn't run so well. I think they thought it was playable. To me, it's not playable. I think that defining playable is a little bit of a personal judgment. To me, it wasn't playable. But so depending on what you're willing to settle for, maybe you can get Nintendo 64 up and running on the system. I do think Nintendo 64 runs a little bit better on the PSP, just kind of a personal preference for me if I'm going to play it portably. And of course, it runs really well on most phones. So in all the wackiness that 2020 has brought us, I think we got to respect the fact that Nintendo sold the new 2DS XL for $100. Maybe production is over now, and as far as I can tell, they aren't even for sale at that price anymore. But for the few months that I think a lot of people had the opportunity to purchase it at that price, I think that was it couldn't have came at a better time, if I'm to put it short. So thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.